But at least they're very interesting guys, so we're going to start with a little bit of an introduction very quickly because we don't have a lot of time. So I'll go from right to left. Stuart, welcome.
Hi everybody, I'm Stuart Grant. I'm the CEO of ARC, Advanced Research Clusters. We're in the business of creating innovation clusters, so we have a bunch in the UK, and we're hoping to expand into Europe. Yeah, so it's quite large. We've probably got about 15,000 people working in our innovation clusters, probably about 300 organizations focused on different types of tech, so space tech, quantum tech, energy tech, and life science, kind of health tech.
Fantastic. Well, thank you for joining. Ville?
Hi, so my name is Ville Simola, and I'm the CEO for Moderator. So we're the leading startup campus in the Nordics. We work with startups, selected corporations, investors, and different ecosystem organizations. And our community is 180 startup companies strong with 1,500 members, and we're planning to expand the campus also in the future.
Laurent?
Hello, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Laurent, I'm the CEO of BeCentral. We are the tech campus of Brussels. And well, I guess a lot of you have been there or are working, learning there. What makes us special is that we are in the biggest train station of the country, or pretty much. So very, very central. And we are mixing students and entrepreneurs. So we have about 500 learners and 500 entrepreneurs on campus.
Great, well, fantastic for the brief introduction. We're going to talk about ecosystem. We're going to talk about the physical aspect of ecosystems and the way that they sort of interact with communities in general. You all have different kinds of businesses, but they're similar in many ways. But I always have trouble if you talk about innovation clusters, you can say innovation hub, you talk about startup campuses. For the sake of argument, let's say these are all the same things. How do you benchmark the success of an innovation cluster, innovation hub, startup campus? What are the goals? What are sort of the KPIs that you know, when you set out? Well, what are the KPIs you set out to do? What is important, and how do you measure yourself against either yourself 2 years ago or others in this space? Maybe if you like to take this one first.
Sure, yeah. So I mean, our focus is at the core of what we do is obviously the startup companies. So how we measure our success and KPIs comes through how our startups are doing. So every year we do an impact study, so where we evaluate the amount of funding raised by the companies, how much revenue they created, also how much jobs being created, and also how much taxes and paid out salaries. So those are kind of the main metrics for us. And obviously aspects such as diversity, for example, so how many different nationalities we have, how much companies are being founded by underrepresented groups, for example. So those are also important metrics to measure.
Great. Stuart? Does that resonate?
You know, that kind of resonates. It's kind of similar. You can measure it in so many ways. Jobs created, venture capital raised per campus, I think is an interesting one. And I think maybe there's an argument to have a league table of venture capital raised by campus for us and competitors, etc. And then drilling down into fundraising money, but what's the result of that capital raised? Have these companies been successful? Have they hired jobs? Have they gone on to Series A funding? Have they gone on to become unicorns, etc.? So there's those sort of measures. And then there's the cross-collaboration measures. I think it's important to kind of track cross-collaboration between scientific endeavors. So at Harwell, for example, our main campus, we see the space industry folks collaborating with the life science folks, and et cetera. So our job is to facilitate that kind of cross-collaboration. So there's many, and then there's the public, private, and academic nexus discussion. Are these companies, you know, getting support from government and from academic institutions? And are the case studies where that's really working well? There are, but you know, can we promote that more? So, there's many success things to measure.
Yeah, but they seem to be very well defined over at the ARC at least. I'm guessing for BeCentral is slightly different because impact is the main KPI as a nonprofit and a foundation and all that. But how do you measure impact?
Yeah, I think it's a very important question, and I will differ a bit with my colleagues. I think the question you are raising is the question of purpose. Why we are building an ecosystem. So it's a societal goal in any case, and we are creating economic growth, we are creating jobs, we are creating opportunities for individuals. And in that sense, we are not measuring the amount of money that is raised by companies. because I don't think that matters. Raising money is just a way to achieve a certain goal, a better product, growing company, and so on. And I think overall there is too much focus in the tech ecosystem on raising money. I know it's easy to measure. Okay, you have a certain amount that is being raised, but it doesn't tell much about the actual added value of the company, the ecosystem on society. So that's why, for example, we measure mostly the number of jobs that are being created and the number of opportunities and the impact on the local GDP that we're having.
Great.
Yeah, just to add to that, I think the purpose point is really relevant because fundamentally we're in this business to solve the world's problems. The scientists and technologists and innovators who are in our campuses, they come to work to try and fix these challenges and the world's problems. And that's the ultimate measure of success. Do any of these companies nail it and solve problems? And a lot of them obviously do. And a classic example would be Vaccitech on our campus. They were, within 9 weeks, they came up with a COVID vaccine that helped, play their part in solving the world's biggest pandemic issues. So I think that's an important measure.
Great. Well, that provides a good foundation for the rest of the conversation. I've been traveling around the world, visiting different startup ecosystems in different stages across my career for the last 16 years or so. What I've noticed is events like these, bringing people together, and also campuses, physical spaces where people can actually meet, collaborate, where they can get to know each other, where they can maybe do partnerships, commercial deals, but also just exchange best practices, talk among peers, are so vital to any startup ecosystem. I cannot stress enough the importance of them. But I find that by now most governments, whether national or European, have come to realize that. The question that I have is, are you getting enough support for that? Do you feel like that there's enough of a catalyst in those circles to really help you achieve your goals? Maybe Laurent, you can start.
Yeah, I think ultimately the growth of an ecosystem is aligning between stakeholders on a common goal. And these stakeholders are entrepreneurs, government or public sector and large companies. Do we have enough support from governments? Well, look here. This morning, Sundar Pichai, the CEO of Google, he's in Brussels. He gets a meeting with the European Commission. We don't get a European commissioner here. Why is that? We have 5 ministers for digital here in Belgium. None of them is present here today. So that shows that there is still a disconnect between the policymakers on the one side and the entrepreneurs on the other side. And I think this is an issue that we've had in Europe for a long time, and that is probably one of the reasons why we are lagging behind other big ecosystems like China and the US, is that between private and public sector, between entrepreneurs and policymakers, there is still a huge gap, and we need to solve that.
Ville, do you subscribe to that notion as well?
Yeah, I can relate to that. And I think, if I think about Finland particularly, I think the ecosystem has been doing quite well. But is it because of things have been done, or is it because of the policymakers have been making things possible? I think it's the first one. I think the good thing about our environment is that there's a clear lack of knowledge in the policymaker level, so kind of educating them. I think once that is completed, then it's a lot easier to get decisions done. But the good thing, for example, if I think about us, so we've established our startup campus in an old hospital location, which is owned by the city of Helsinki. So in the beginning, actually, like the proposal came from their side that we have this vacant old hospital, and we have an idea that could this be turned into an innovation or startup hub. And the good thing was that they didn't tell that this is how it should be done, but instead they actually approached a group of founders and introduced the idea. So they kind of actually pitched the idea. And then there was, dozen companies who came to the corridors, and it was dark, and it was November, and raining, and slush, and everything.
But then it's always dark in Finland, even in the summer.
Actually, not right now, but most of the time, yes, you're correct. But eventually, then that's kind of the spark for the idea. And then what the municipality did, they kind of gave some subsidy in the beginning, of course, with the plan that with some years we will become self-sufficient. But I think that's been a good example of a working model within public-private combination. And the key there has been kind of like giving the space for the entrepreneurs, for the founders to actually make it look like they want, and then giving the space, and then at some point kind of like let go.
Super refreshing. I think that's more of an exception to the rule than most countries that I've seen, at least. Stuart, anything to add?
Yeah, no, I think Harwell is a great case study. If you haven't been there, please come over to the UK and visit us. I got involved 3 years ago with Brookfield, a big Canadian investor, bought 50% of Harwell, and that's when I got involved. But the joint venture partner is the UK government. So I was like, oh my goodness, partnering with the government, this is going to be like wading through treacle. It's going to be painful, bureaucratic, etc. But my experience has been completely different, and they are certainly in our case study. They're entrepreneurial, effective. We get a lot of government ministers coming out. We've increased the volume because we're turning we're getting more attention from them. But Moderna, for example, they say they want to come to Europe. They start looking for sites. We get wind of it, we call them up, and we go with the UK government scientific experts in life science, along with our folks, and we talk to them, and we managed to persuade them to come to Harwell. It's probably create 150 jobs, and it'll be a drug manufacturing and R&D facility, state of the art, the first in Europe. So I think it's really important that government engage. It's disappointing to hear your anecdote here, but let's grab them by the ear, these important government people, and get them to engage in our science and innovation sector.
Yeah. Do innovation clusters always work out? Does it always make sense to bring innovators together in one physical space, or researchers or whatever? Are there any downsides to actually doing that in a physical way? Whoever wants to take this one first.
I would say, it's kind of common sense. You kind of put clever scientists and innovators and technologists in the same area. They can talk. Like this conference is great, isn't it? We're all in the room at the back, swapping cards, etc. There'll be some great ideas and business that comes out of that. So what we're seeing here today is happening every day in our different facilities. So I would be a big advocate. What's the opposite? The other end of the spectrum is to try and be an inventor or a technologist in a remote island in the Pacific, and you're not going to bump into people and share ideas. So,
yeah.
So I think co-locating is good.
Yeah, and I think, when we talk about startups, and I think there is a difference between an innovation ecosystem and a startup ecosystem. So in an innovation ecosystem, it might be that there's like big corporates who are kind of driving and being in the middle, whereas in the startup ecosystem, you really have the startups in the core. So I think maybe, in general, I think, bringing everyone together is a good thing. However, it needs to be curated, so the content. So who's coming in, and especially we talk about large corporations. If they kind of take over and they take the show, then that might make it more difficult for startups to kind of to shine. So at least in our example, we've been like really cautious, so to giving space for corporations unless they really create like significant value. Otherwise, then yes, we're happy to do partnerships with them and programs with them, but not giving kind of the access to the core.
Yeah, you have to be selective in many ways.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Anything to add?
I'm going to be a bit contrarian again. Sorry, Robin. Actually, I would say there are many ecosystems that fail, and you have tons of examples of tentative ecosystems spending millions and millions with very little results. It's difficult. I think we have to face it. It's not always working. Sometimes it's tough. I think the critical part is governance, because ultimately an ecosystem is a common good, and all entrepreneurs win when an ecosystem is working out, but there is always an incentive to go for private interest. So that's why the governance aspect is so important, and that's why, for example, for us, BeCentral, we are owned by the ecosystem. So my shareholders are entrepreneurs from the ecosystem. And I think that's very important. When I have people visiting, I always say the one thing you should copy from us is our cap table. And I see many projects getting huge subsidies. And I tell them, don't take the millions of subsidies, because it's going to be too much money, and you might not be able, to scale sufficiently fast. And so I'm not saying that subsidies are not good. They can be good, but as long as the right governance is in place. And I think this element of governance is often why ecosystems can be in trouble or can fail.
Yeah. It's an interesting point of view. I think I agree, like grassroots community is sort of where it has to start, and then you see kind of what happens, but that's where it usually starts.
I think also just one on, this is the softer side of the industry, but neurodiverse design in the creation of these environments can create failure for competitors who are not focused on that. They're just providing a pretty bland facility with a few desks or labs. But I think the leading players, if you go to the US, are kind of a little bit ahead of Europe, but they're really focused on neurodiverse design, creating places where you want to hang out, you want to collaborate, have your coffee, have your collision points. Like you got here, you got your music playing, you got good food, etc. So I think spending a bit of time on that softer side of the industry can pay dividends as well.
We're very quickly running out of time, but I wanted to put this question in for sure. We were living through a market downturn, for better or worse. Some call it a very much needed correction, but the end result is the same: less investment, less late-stage activity. Is it having an effect on your business, and is it substantial enough to worry about the next 6, 12, maybe 18 months? Laurent?
Well, I'm touching wood. So far, not. The ecosystem and our campus has been growing nicely. I think it's also having a mix of players. Of course, it reduces the risk. We're hosting schools, we're hosting startups, scale-ups, innovation entities from larger companies. So that's a way to balance the risk. But I think also, okay, it's not that easy to raise money at the moment, but I mean, let's face it, the tech is still booming, AI is booming, space is booming. I mean, it's still great to be in tech, and I mean, job opportunities have never been that good. So yeah, so far I'm still very optimistic.
Great. Ville?
Yeah, I mean, so far it's been pretty much the same for us, but it has required more flexibility from our side. So obviously, like mentioned many times today, hard to raise capital, and companies try to stretch their runways. They're asking more and more payment times from our side for their rents and so forth. So we do our parts there to be as flexible as possible to make it happen. And I think in many examples, then, even though it has actually looked quite bad, it had turned actually into a good situation. So from that point of view, I mean, we don't see much yet, and we've been through COVID as well. So I mean, I'm also optimistic on that.
Good. Optimism by nature, I think, in the tech community.
Yeah, and at the coal face of our business, if you sat in the business development meeting, you see a whole list of interesting organizations, some big, some small. And I tell you, the life science sector still is very healthy. We tend to be around Oxford. We've got 2 big campuses in Oxford, one in London, but it's the life science players, followed by space, probably followed by energy tech, and then quantum's a new cluster that we're evolving. So just beginning to start. But yeah, I agree with the colleagues here. It's feels quite healthy. I kind of look at Boston often as a barometer and track venture capital activity there, because that leads through to kind of business development. Their year-on-year numbers I think are off 30% in Boston. So, but it's still ahead of pre-pandemic levels. This is more on the life science VC side. But it's always a barometer to, for our business development guys to track. But it's okay at the moment.
We need to wrap up, but very quickly, closing thoughts on how you think ecosystems will develop in the next few years. Are you positive? Are you optimistic? Or
yeah, I would advocate, if you're going to build an ecosystem, it's good to be near a good university, a good hospital, or an existing cluster, or near a series of national laboratories, so you can.
That seems like a good blueprint for everyone to follow, right?
As opposed to.
Are you closing thoughts?
Yeah, I think also the role of ecosystems will be lot stronger in the future. I mean, we've seen venture capital being more distributed. We see the talent more being distributed, and kind of like Silicon Valley losing its power. So it's kind of like distributing all over. And I think our job in Europe is to make sure that we have the strong ecosystems that will attract that capital, would attract that talent. And
super crucial. Yeah. Laurent?
Yeah, and building on what Ville is saying, I think today ecosystems in Europe are very successful at the city level or at the country level, and we are on a way to a single market, I hope so, and to a truly digital Europe, and that will mean, in a sense, more connections between the ecosystems. I think they've all matured compared to 5 or 10 years ago, but now the next opportunity will really be to connect these different ecosystems and give the opportunity also to our talent to move more from one ecosystem to another.
Yeah. Okay, we need to wrap up. Thank you so much for sharing your insights. Laurent, Ville, Stuart, thank you so much. Thank you for joining.
Thank you.